that is, a sort of symptom of the fact that we have an irregular, just an unnatural amount of desire to see those 1% of artists, the Taylor Swifts, the Lizzos, the Billie Eilish, Coldplay, whatever. There's, everybody wants to see these very, very small amount of acts. And with Side Door, we sort of envision a world with a much larger middle class of artistry where it would be way more normal to go to your neighbor's backyard and see somebody who you've never heard of, but it's so close to you, the proximity is so accessible. Why not go and check it out? And why not have an artistic experience close to home?
Following the news, you're no doubt aware of the fiasco surrounding Ticketmaster. It really came to the forefront with the pre-sale for Taylor Swift tickets. Hours-long wait times, system crashes, low inventory, and resellers listing tickets for tens of thousands of dollars was the final straw for many concert goers. It's hard enough for musicians to make a living through touring. Not only are the fees associated with playing major venues rising, but the artists themselves generally only receive a fraction of the money from the high ticket costs. But where does your concert money go? What other options are there for fans who just want to get out and enjoy live music? I'm James Battison from MoneyWise. Joining me today are Laura Simpson and Dan Mangan, co-founders of Side Door, a web-based platform that supports in-person shows by connecting musicians with concert hosts. Laura Simpson has extensive experience in the music industry. Since the age of 14, she's been involved in it, doing everything from managing and producing music festivals to working as a journalist for CBC and Rogers Radio. In 2011, she founded the Syrup Factory, which not only offers strategic solutions and services to artists, but also hosts house concerts. Dan Mangan is a two-time Juno Award-winning musician who got his start playing house concerts and underground art spaces. He's released 7 studio albums, a number of EPs, has scored TV shows for Netflix, CBC, and AMC, and has toured extensively. His latest album, which I highly recommend, is called Being Somewhere, and it's out on Arts and Crafts Records. Thanks for joining me, Laura and Dan.
Oh, thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Great. So to begin, can you describe basically how Side Door functions and what inspired the formation of it?
Well, I played a lot of house concerts as I was beginning my own career, and I always found that they were really rewarding, in a sort of artistic sense, but that also because the costs were so low, often I would make way more money playing to 30 people in a living room than I would if I played to those same 30 people in a bar. And, when the numbers are that small, the cost of touring is just way too intense. And basically the presumption is that you just have to go out on the road and lose money until you are discovered or, the industry takes notice of you or what have you, break through the gatekeepers. So I had a keen interest in this from early on. And I sort of had this philosophy that if your footprint cannot be wide, let it be deep. Fox paw in the snow, make a lasting impression with 30, 40, 50 people if you can't sell 1,000 tickets kind of thing. And when I met Laura, she'd been hosting this incredible house concert series out in Halifax, and we were introduced by a mutual friend. And it just became very clear that we had similar interests and actually eerily similar ideas of what could be built to sort of, an international marketplace for the arts where any space is a venue. So we founded Side Door in 2017, and though we were derailed by the pandemic and kind of swerved into online shows, we've gone back to our initial core purpose, which is very much to connect artists with everyday people, allowing regular fans to become stakeholders in the industry and to host and curate where in the spaces where they have. And it's truly a win for everybody. These hosts get to bring together their community and the arts, and sort of decentralizes the epicenters. It's not just in the downtown cores. The artists are making a living, they're getting paid, and the audiences get these incredible intimate experiences, in spots where you might not expect it.
Yeah, I'm still hosting in my house. I have a show coming up in a month, less than a month now, and it's it was my favorite thing. And people always were like, "Well, you can figure that out because you work in the industry." And I wanted to make it super accessible for anybody to host because it was really the most rewarding experience as an audience member to host. And it was really lucrative for artists that I was working with. So we really wanted to use technology as the access point for that.
Absolutely. So as a concert goer, like when I buy a ticket through Ticketmaster or some other reseller or other seller, where does the money actually go? Like what percentage makes it to the artist and what goes to the various, to the venue, to the agency and so on?
Well, I mean, we work in a really small scale. So, I mean, Dan could probably answer for bigger, but in terms of like, I'll just mention because Dan obviously has more of a stake in this, but we have an artist who just posted a blog about what they usually take home from a normal venue gig versus like sort of a more curated DIY space versus side door. And it was just like a way to sort of open people's eyes to where your money is actually going.
Yeah, I think that, there's like the ticket price, which is, let's say anywhere from $10 to $200, depending on what kind of artist you're going to see. And the artist will take, after the costs of the show, after the marketing, after the security, after the venue rental, that they will take a portion of that anywhere from, as low as like 20% to maybe 70% or 80%. And the crazy thing of, the sort of monopolized world that we're in right now is that, when the same company owns the venue, is taking the bar sales, is taking the venue rental fee, and then also is, the promoter on the show. And so then is taking a cut from, ticket sales and revenue, but then is also the ticketing site, and then is tacking on fees, which are sometimes like almost 100% of what the actual ticket fee is. You have a situation where the actual artist performing is earning like a very, very small amount of all of the money that is sort of happening in the scenario. And it's not, I don't see it as in people being evil or bad. It's just that this is sort of the way that the industry has generally gone. And often what happens is that you have these artists, the big marquee artists who get a big check from, one of the bigger players. And they say, look, we're just going to give you this fee. It's actually more than the cost of all the tickets combined. And they basically leverage the weight that they have in all of their various different categories to give the artist a big check, and then they will be the bad guy, and the artist gets to make their money. And then they collect in parking fees and, everything else. They sort of conglomerate all of the access points to consumers in this situation. Now, that is, a sort of symptom of the fact that we have an an unnatural amount of desire to see those 1% of artists, the Taylor Swifts, the Lizzos, the Billie Eilish, Coldplay, whatever. There's, everybody wants to see these very, very small amount of acts. And with Side Door, we sort of envision a world with a much larger middle class of artistry, where it would be way more normal to go to your neighbor's backyard and see somebody who you've never heard of, but it's so close to you, the proximity is so accessible. Why not go and check it out? And why not have an artistic experience close to home, in a setting where it's, there's a little bit more, transparency around the finances. So with Side Door, we can say that, in general, with most of our shows, the artists are taking between 70 and 90% of the ticket. And it's a very clear, transparent, sort of friendly environment.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, I read the blog on your site about the ticket sales and how it breaks down. It's fascinating. It's eye-opening, and just, the idea that so much ends up in the hands of these few players. And there was an article on CBC about Coldplay tickets being cheaper in Seattle than Canada, and it's unreasonable to go see those 1% of the acts. I won't be going to see Beyonce anytime soon, is what I'm saying, unless she happens to do a Side Door. It used to be like, and you've spoken to this somewhat, but it used to be that a musician would make an album, go out on tour, and that was highly profitable for them, a good way to get known and receive a return on their investment. But now artists like Cadence Weapon and Santa Gold have spoken out about how difficult it is to make money by touring. Raleigh Pemberton, who's Cadence Weapon, he wrote an article for Toronto Life saying that live concerts will not survive unless there's industry-wide change. How difficult is it for an artist to nowadays make money by touring, especially mid-level artists? Now, this has been touched on, but yeah, how difficult is it, and what kind of disruption are you guys bringing to that industry?
Yeah, I mean, I can answer for some of the artists that we've been working with, just feeling out the return, I guess. It's not a normal return. We're coming back to 4 times, 5 times the costs of everything. So it's prohibitive for lots of artists, and some of them are just not touring at all. So it really deepens the need to get more return on investment on these tours for it to even make sense to go out on the road. And that's including if people are getting sick. I mean, Dan can share the stories of what was happening on his tours, but the biggest thing is like, you don't have the revenue from selling records. You're lucky if you have a sync deal and that's coming in. We just in Canada lost CBC Radio 3 on SiriusXM. That was a huge chunk of change that came in for artists on a regular basis. So, it really means that we're losing not only artists who are on tour, but artists in general. They're having to either completely go full-time into another job or just quit music altogether. And I think that's a real tragedy with some of the music that we're losing. It's really destroying the ecosystem right now.
Yeah, and I think that, I envision a worst case scenario where there are no more small clubs. There's no more sort of like pollination breeding ground for, up and coming bands. There is only people who go viral on TikTok and arena tours, and it's like that the fans only know people because of social media, and the only concerts you can go to are in arenas because those are the only kinds of, scale that is sustainable to, in that ecosystem. And that sounds really scary to me, as somebody who has spent a lot of time in bars and clubs performing and also meeting other bands and seeing bands. And, I think that what ends up happening in that circumstance is a homogenization of art, a weakening of culture, and, a sort of a weakening, resilient heart of a civilization in general. If all we have is pop stars, and we need a sustainable place for all kinds of weird art to occur, where people to take risks, where people can, experience and be exposed to things that, they might not find on their algorithm. I think it's really important on a sort of philosophical level that we have a big, wide middle class of artistry. And it's something that we're working very hard to try and foster.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, speaking from personal experience, one of my greatest concert memories is going to see back when it was Anthony and the Johnsons and Current 93 play at a church in Toronto. And it was like mind blowing, the experience. But yeah, you lose that if they can't make it. It's not profitable to them. Traditionally, what percentage of a musician's take-home pay would come from touring?
I mean, I think it's changed over the years. I think that, if you go back to like the 70s and the 80s, artists would make a lot, would make more money from sales. And so it was like they would tour to support the record, and then that flipped probably in the early 2000s, where the record was an excuse to go on tour and make more money. So everyone was touring more. Now it's just a crapshoot. People are pulling whatever they can from whatever revenue source, whether that's digital royalties or mechanicals or sync placements, a little bit from streaming, a little bit from touring, a little bit from merch, a little bit from their Substack or their Patreon. I think that artists have had to get very creative and diversify how they make a living. I think that side door, again, it comes down to sort of removing a lot of the fray and the sort of the mess of it all, and just putting, here's the simple economics of what it means to put like 60 people in your backyard. And when the artist is walking away with 90%, it honestly, like, I remember when I was touring house concerts as a young musician, and I'd come home from like a bar gig with like $50 and a beer ticket, but then I'd come home from this a house concert to the same amount of people, and I'd have like $500, and I would have sold a bunch of CDs, and most importantly, I felt like I was fanning a flame, that I was making something out of something. And I think that in general, that's what artists need, as well as money, is to feel like they're kicking the ball down the field. And the burnout doesn't necessarily come from being broke. Artists are used to being broke. The burnout comes from the feeling of not getting anywhere. And so Side Door is here to say, look, you're not selling out a huge theater, but we can do something special with a small amount of people. And here on the ground are some people who care about you and want you to succeed. And in that environment, I think artists can thrive.
So you've touched on this, and I want to expand on something that, Dan, you were talking about. Again, the two of you to kind of discuss. Large acts are probably not going to go away from using Ticketmaster. And other big ticket sellers. What is the draw? How can the middle level act change how their perceptions are about dealing with venues like that? Do they just need to say, well, we can't play at this venue anymore. We're not going to support them. We're going to go solely through places like Side Door and other smaller venues. Like, what's the interaction? What's the chemistry, this, specific coordination of, what's the alchemy involved in this?
I think that it's interesting. I was just at a conference for the last 5 days talking to artists about agency and the lack of feeling like they have, if they don't even like literally have an agent, they may not even feel like they have the agency to determine the terms of engagement. And so I think it's important to remember the power imbalance that they face when they're looking for a gig or they're looking for something. There's just the supply and demand issue in this situation is like there's just so many artists that the venues and the promoters can be really, really choosy and really, really harsh with negotiations with artists. But at the same time, there are lots of supporters and fans who have no particular stake or need for revenue in the market. So that's sort of where we find our best hosts is people who are music fans first, who want to participate. And in those cases, the artists are finding more agency of like, this is what I need. I want to set the ticket price to this. Like it's only a go if we sell this many tickets. And in that way, they can start to determine a little bit more of their future by saying, these are the things that I need to make this a go. And I find that more in these smaller shows that they're a little more able to say what they need.
Yeah. And I think that, it's not just that we need friendlier ticketing or that we need, more transparent ticketing. It's that we need something that feels like a community, something that feels like it is, I think like we feel like we're doing a good job when we get the sense that's, a bunch of people's, existential needs were met, that they walked away from a spiritual type of artistic experience. And the artist got paid well, that is, it's sort of like all of these factors combine. And, we don't anticipate that we're going to take a chunk out of the big guys, that's not really, but what we can do is sort of lift up the small to medium folks and make sure that they have an environment where they can feel empowered to make their own decisions, to have some stakes at the table, and just basically give them an opportunity to play that they wouldn't find elsewhere.
Do you foresee more artists choosing to use alternative spaces in the future and using venues like Side Door?
I think that artists will take any and every opportunity that they see in front of them. I think that when you get offered that great festival play, you take it. You get offered a great gig here, you take it. Obviously, the artists who are kind of scrappy and DIY tend to get more opportunities. And one of the most eye-opening moments for us was Said the Whale was on tour, and they had used Side Door to book a handful of small, intimate shows along the way. When they had days off, they've got crew to pay, they've got costs. They were like, well, if we can play a show, we should play a show. So they played at a soft theater in Nanaimo, and I think they sold about 300 and something tickets, and they walked away with like $1,600 because the cost of the theater was so prohibitive. And like within the next week, they were playing in Lethbridge, Alberta, to 60 people, and they made $2,200. And it was like, here you had, they made 150% as much money playing to 60 people as they did to 300 a week before. And that when Tyler from Said the Whale called me, he was like, I can't believe this. It doesn't make any sense, And it was just because they were able to find, a loving host in Lethbridge who, had a cool art space and was like, yeah, I'd love to host a thing. And, didn't want to, maybe they took a little bit of the money for some of their minimum nominal costs, but it wasn't like I don't know. It was essentially a really special moment for the band, for the people who got to see them in this intimate space. Everybody won, and Said the Whale walked away going, man, we just made more money than we did through the show that we booked through our agent in a theater,
We've actually converted a bunch of artists and industry people through experiencing the shows, and then they are like, oh, now we want to invest because we understand the possibilities here. So that, it's been quite gratifying to have people come on as users first and then investors second, and like people who are, major players in the industry. So yeah, we kind of envision, like Dan said, working with the smaller and mid-level artists, but there are lots of those folks who are going to go on to be, bigger artists. And so we get to be a bit of the farm team for that.
Laura, you're going to be at South by Southwest this year discussing how to tour in 2023 without going broke. And
yeah, Dan's actually moderating the panel.
Okay, well, there you go. That's going to be very cool. I'll take.
Hopefully, if he's not winning a Juno at the same time, that's going to be a challenge.
That will be the balancing. Let's hope he does win, and let's hope the panel goes well as well.
Exactly.
So, how have musicians needed to change the way they think about making money? I mean, you've talked about this and you've kind of alluded to it, but traditional models have changed. But what does Side Door do to disrupt the method and to provide an alternative way of thinking and reasoning about it?
I think that the general model has always been that artists are willing to do absolutely anything for exposure, because in their minds, getting more exposure means that they will get more buy-in from the industry, and then the gatekeepers will accept them into the ivory towers. And once they're in the ivory towers, they're made in the shade. It's like this equation where I'm willing to give up everything for a chance to be chosen. And I think the biggest disruption, the biggest reshaping of that is to say, I can make like a carpenter's wage doing what I love. And the whole time, maybe I have the opportunity to be huge. Maybe that happens. But rather than buying a lottery ticket, I can punch the clock and do what I love and make a living. And it's, the joke is artists will do anything for exposure, but you can die from exposure. It's that is the ongoing joke. And so I think that is the mind shift. That is sort of like that I can actively do something that puts, kicks the ball down the field rather than just throwing all my well-being in the air and hoping something happens.
Yeah. And I just add quickly to that is that a rethinking of what the show has to be is really important in terms of like technical needs, stage setup, like having a sound tech or not, having amplification or not. how close the audience is. Like there's a comfort level that you need to have as an artist to do some of these shows where a lot of those things are maybe not clearly understood or known until you arrive on in the space, and you might have to improvise in a really huge way. And that is, you have to kind of be comfortable with the improvisation of that. And but some folks really thrive in that kind of setting. But if you are able to adapt to those situations and understand that what you're doing doesn't have to be the same performance every time, but you're really just looking for what magic can I create in this particular space with these particular people, that is kind of more of, the kind of shows that we're looking to do. Is like, it doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be like the most exquisite sound you've ever heard. It's just more about what kind of connection can we make here.
Well, that perfectly leads into the next question. But for concert goers, like, what is the benefit to buying a ticket to a show through Side Door?
Well, and even speaking more to the idea of disruption or changing things, I think that, historically tours are booked 6 months, 9 months in advance by an agent, lots of phone calls, lots of contracts. And then they are announced at the same time to try and get as much attention from the media, and to try and sell tickets. And Side Door sort of becomes a much more nimble way of doing things. You could notice that you have a day off next Thursday, build a show call, connect with a host within minutes or hours, and have the show booked for days from now. That you could book and put a show on sale with a random host in a random place that you've never met in a short amount of time. And it makes the whole process of how shows are booked and how they're executed far more nimble. And I think that that's really exciting. And on the side of concert goers, to answer your question there, the idea that, I like the world I picture is like, it's 4:00. I look at my Side Door app, and I see that there's 7 shows happening within 600 meters of me right now. And I peruse through those artists. Maybe I don't know them, maybe I do. And I say, oh, I'm going to grab a 6-pack and wander over with the kids or something. The show's in like 2 hours. Let's go check it out. That there can be this sort of like, there is something to do near you. It's going to be vital. It's going to be exciting. And it's going to be unique. And it's going to be in a space where, is untraditional. And I think that knowing that your money is going into an artist's pocket, knowing that, you are supplying and putting your voting dollars into a community that is, local and exciting and artistic is pretty cool.
Yeah, and accessibility is in our name for a reason. It's like that is a thing that we really strive for, is how you can break down the walls of who can go, who can create a show. And you think about those Taylor Swift tickets you mentioned, like most people are going to be in the nosebleeds. There's very little actual access to the artist. But in the shows that we're wanting to do, you probably meet them every time.
Let's say I'm interested in hosting a Side Door show. What do I do to go about, getting my venue, my backyard or wherever it is available? And as a host, like, is there the opportunity for me to make money from the concert? Like, how does that distribution work?
Yeah. So you can just easily sign up and just always be looking, because basically once you have a profile on Side Door, we don't make people have to host a certain number of shows or like be in a certain place or anything like that. But you'll be notified anytime there's somebody who wants to play near you. And so you can respond or not. It's really meant to cater to the host needs in terms of like the frequency and their taste. But you can also post like, I'm actually putting up my hand and I want to meet new people and say, I want to do a show between this date and this date, and people can respond directly to you based on the things that you're offering. So you can say like, I just have a tiny little living room. it looks like this, it feels like this is, it has to be unamplified because of my neighbors or whatever. You can dictate the terms of that engagement. And yeah, you can take a split of the sales. It's all negotiated in the booking process. So the artist and the host are booking. Side Door is there to help facilitate technologically, but also there's real human support behind every single show where we can help. If you're a new host and a new artist and you don't know how to negotiate, we have suggested ticket pricing, how to manage, like the capacities, all that stuff. So we're really there to help you create a show. And then if you have costs, like you want to rent some chairs or you want to do some catering or whatever, you can take a percentage of the ticket gross so they can cover those costs.
Very cool. So, and let's say I'm a musician, Massey Hall's not returning my calls personally anymore. I don't know. But, it's the same thing where I just kind of sign up and have access to that community, correct?
Yeah, exactly. You can no barrier to entry. We do basically vet hosts and artists. Like every day, the staff is going through everybody, just looking for safety and trigger issues. We often have calls with new hosts just to kind of review the expectations. But in a lot of cases, we're doing outreach, like we're going to places, we're meeting people in person. They're coming on because they're a fan of an artist that we work with. So there's usually an actual connection between somebody who's already on the platform and somebody who's coming on.
So what is the biggest act that Side Door has supported, and what's the biggest venue that you've hosted for?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny when we were doing the online shows, it really opened us up to working with some larger, we had Vance Joy and Tom Odell do some shows. For in-person shows, I mean, some of the largest or most exciting ones, we've worked with Broken Social Scene. We put Broken Social Scene at a goat farm. It's like indie punk skate park / goat farm just outside of, Boise, Idaho. And I'm trying to think I don't know what our largest show has been.
I looked it up. Yeah, I looked it up. The largest one we actually did was with Matt Mays in Cape Breton at a community center. So that center ran a series all summer, and they were an outdoor, so it was like 250 cap or maybe 300 cap. I'm not sure, but there was in the hundreds. So that's sort of the larger side, and we have worked with theaters as well. So it's not out of the question to work with sort of soft seaters. They just usually have their own ticketing scheme that they run.
You have a stipend type deal for artists who are playing, cross border and everything. Did you want to talk about that a bit? Because I think that's a really cool incentive for any artists listening.
Well, one of the funny things about hosts is that they often don't know who to choose in terms of artists, because they're like, I don't know these artists. I don't maybe even trust my own taste when I'm listening. I'm like, is this good? Or my friend's going to like this, that kind of thing. So we wanted to give them a little bit of understanding of maybe a curator who's also chosen this artist. So all of the artists who are playing South by Southwest and also Folk Alliance, which is the conference I was just at in Kansas City, the artists who were chosen for those festivals are eligible to do this program where any shows they book with us, we're going to tack on an extra $500 a show for those shows. So it helps the artists in terms of making sure that they're paid adequately, but it also helps bring on new folks to be like, oh, I know Folk Alliance or I know South by, so I'm going to use that as a way to check out those artists who are playing. So, Pool Blood, for example, who's coming from Toronto and playing down there, they got picked for NPR release of the week in January. And so that they were able to take that, leverage that, go to a host who didn't know them, but that, having that sanction kind of helps people make the decision a little bit easier. So that's why we're doing the program. Yeah.
That's it. So cool. Yeah. Final question. What do you think about Ticketmaster being held accountable for their business practices?
I mean, again, I work with Live Nation. These are not evil people. These are human beings. However, it is a massive publicly traded company that is accountable to its shareholders, where profit is the only incentive, And so my gripe isn't so much with this kind of conglomerate of companies so much as, this is sort of this is what enough unfettered capitalism will bring about. But I mean, do they need to be broken up? I mean, sure, they need to be held accountable for some pretty. I think the problem is that you have a system with a lot of conflict of interest. If you have a big pie, and the pie is, this is a show going on in a city, when one company owns or controls 99% of all of the interested parties in producing that show, whether it's the venue, the all of the infrastructure needed, the promotion, and in some cases, I think Live Nation is starting to be kind of act as an agent as well. That they really are just taking more and more and more and more and more of the pie. So there's not a lot of reason for them to negotiate with themselves. They can kind of say, oh yeah, we'll take a hit here because then we know that we're going to make all our money here. But they're not necessarily acting for the benefit of the artist, and they're not acting for the benefit of the consumer. They're acting for the benefit of the shareholder. And so it's, I'm not a specialist. I'm not like a labor lawyer or an economist. I think that, if there are some dicey practices at play, yes, of course, they should be held accountable just like any other kind of company. But again, like, I don't see them as evil or bad so much as the sort of result of an industry that has in dire need for some alternatives, and Side Door offers an alternative for artists, for concert goers, and for fans, hosts alike. It creates another option that might be a little bit friendlier.
Yeah, I mean, I would just reiterate that, like, I think people can be afraid of new tech platforms. You're always a little suspicious of what's going on behind the scenes. And I think that's why Dan and I get out as much as we can in front of people, because, half the team are artists, and, our UX designer is an artist. Like, we're all just actually just people who want to use technology to our advantage to try to create something different. So we're really accessible on social media, and also just like in support. So if anybody's ever interested in what we're doing, they can always just reach out.